The Exitus rifle's muzzle flash lit up the night like a dying star as Kaine Vorthak dove behind the rockcrete barricade. 3 seconds earlier, everything had been according to plan. Now, heretic Lasfire surrounded him on all sides, and his primary target was still breathing. This is how it all began, not with perfect precision, but with chaos and blood and the bitter taste of failure. But first, you need to understand what turns a child into the Imperium's deadliest weapon. Chapter 1. Normal Life. The Schola Progenium on Necromunda, Hive Tertius, looked like any other Imperial educational facility from the outside. Grey rockcrete walls bearing the Aquila, servo skulls drifting through corridors filled with the sound of children reciting the Imperial Creed. I was 7 years old when I arrived, clutching a worn pit capture of parents I could barely remember. They had died serving the Emperor, I was told. That made me special. That made me worthy. The dormitories housed 200 children, all orphans of Imperial servants who had given their lives for the throne. We slept in rows of metal bunks, our thin mattresses separated by exactly 47 centimeters. I measured it obsessively, finding comfort in precision even then. The air tasted of recycled atmosphere and industrial cleanser, with an underlying tang of fear sweat that I wouldn't understand until years later. Sister Mordian ran our block with an iron fist wrapped in prayer beads. She stood exactly 1.8 meters tall, her augmetic left eye constantly scanning us for signs of weakness or deviation. Her voice never rose above a whisper, yet we heard every word she spoke, as if the Emperor himself commanded us. "Children of the faithful," she would say during evening prayers, "you are not here by accident. The God Emperor has chosen you for service. Some of you will join the Astra Militarum, others will serve the Administratum or Ecclesiarchy. A precious few." Her augmetic eye would click and whir as it focused on individual children. A precious few will serve in ways that cannot be spoken of. I excelled at everything they taught us: marksmanship, stealth, Imperial doctrine, xenobiology, toxicology, subjects that seemed strange for a basic education but made perfect sense in hindsight. My hands never shook when I held a weapon. My breathing remained steady when other children panicked during combat exercises. I felt nothing when we were shown pic captures of mutants, heretics, and xenos that made my classmates vomit or cry. The instructors noticed. They always notice. Commissar Vex arrived when I was 12. He wore the standard uniform of his office, but his movements held a predator's grace that made even Sister Mordian step aside. His eyes were like chips of winter ice, and when he looked at me during combat trials, I felt something shift in my chest. Not fear, but recognition. Here was someone who understood what I was becoming. "Cadet 4471, he said after I had achieved perfect scores in 17 consecutive marksmanship tests. "Walk with me." We left the training halls and entered sections of the facility I had never seen. The walls here bore different symbols. Not the standard Aquila, but more specialized insignia that seemed to writhe when viewed peripherally. The air tasted different too, charged with an energy that made my skin prickle. "Do you know why you are here, child?" Vex asked as we walked. "To serve the Emperor, sir." "Correct, but incomplete." He stopped before a massive vault door. "You are here because you possess a gift. The ability to take life without hesitation, without remorse, without the psychological damage that cripples lesser individuals. Do you understand what that makes you?" I considered his question carefully. Around us, servo skulls drifted silently, their optical sensors recording every word. "Valuable, sir?" His laugh was like breaking glass. "Honest. Good. Yes, valuable beyond measure." The vault door began to cycle open with a sound like thunder. "The Imperium has many servants, boy. Billions of soldiers, trillions of bureaucrats, countless priests and tech priests. But true killers, perfect killers, these are rarer than archaeotech." Beyond the vault lay a museum of death. Weapons from across the galaxy lined the walls. Astartes bolters, Eldar shuriken catapults, Tau pulse rifles, and dozens of patterns I didn't recognize. In the center stood a display case containing a single rifle. It was impossibly elegant, its stock carved from what looked like polished bone, its barrel a work of art that somehow conveyed lethal intent through pure aesthetics. The Exitus rifle, Vex whispered reverently. Crafted by the tech adepts of the Vindicare Temple using techniques that predate the Imperium itself, in the right hands, this weapon can kill from distances measured in kilometers. It can punch through power armor, penetrate void shields, and eliminate targets that conventional forces could never reach. I stared at the weapon, and I swear by the throne that it stared back. My fingers tingled with phantom sensation, as if I were already holding it. The Vindicare Temple, Vex continued, trains perhaps 20 candidates per century. Of those, perhaps 5 survive to become full assassins. The rest, he gestured at the walls lined with weapons. The rest provides specimens for the temple's research into improved killing methods. A normal child would have been terrified. A normal child would have backed away, would have begged to return to the safety of dormitories and evening prayers. I stepped closer to the display case. "When do we begin?" I asked. Vex smiled, and in that smile I saw my future, a future written in blood and shadow, in the screams of the dying and the silence of the dead. I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt something I had never experienced before: purpose. The first lesson came that very night. Vex led me to a holding cell deep beneath the Schola, where a man in tattered guard fatigues sat chained to a metal chair. His eyes were wild with terror, darting between Vex and me like a cornered animal. "This is Trooper Kels," Vex explained calmly. "He was convicted of cowardice in the face of the enemy. Imperial justice demands death, but his execution has been delayed for educational purposes." He handed me a las pistol. Standard pattern, freshly charged, safety disengaged. "Kill him," Vex ordered. I raised the weapon. Kels began to sob, pleading for mercy in a voice cracked with desperation. His chains rattled as he tried to press himself back into the chair, as if a few centimeters might save him from the inevitable. "Please," Kels whispered. "I have children. I have..." The last bolt took him through the heart. Perfect shot. Instant death. The cell filled with the smell of burnt flesh and ozone. I lowered the weapon and looked at Vex. He was watching me intently, searching my face for some reaction. I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, no horror. Just the mild interest of a job completed successfully. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Ready for the next lesson, sir?" His smile was approving. "Yes," he said softly. "Yes, I believe you are." Chapter 2. Strange Signs. The Vindicare Temple on Terra existed in a space between spaces, hidden within the labyrinthine undercity beneath the Imperial Palace itself. To reach it, Vex and I descended through layers of history, past fungal farms that fed the teeming masses above, through ancient subway tunnels where blind servitors maintained systems whose original purpose had been forgotten, down into regions where the very air seemed thick with the weight of accumulated centuries. The temple's entrance was unremarkable. A simple door, marked with the Officio Assassinorum seal. 2 Culexus assassins flanked it, their featureless masks tracking our approach with mechanical precision. They said nothing, but I felt something brush against my mind. A cold, invasive touch that made my vision flicker for a moment. "They're testing you," Vex explained as we passed between them. "Culexus operatives can sense psychic potential, emotional instability, mental corruption. If you had failed their scan..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Inside, the temple was a contradiction. Ancient stonework merged seamlessly with the most advanced technology the Imperium could provide. Servo skulls drifted through corridors carved from blocks of Terran granite, while hololithic displays showed targeting data from operations across the galaxy. The air hummed with the constant whisper of data transmission and the distant sound of weapons fire from training chambers. Master Kestrel awaited us in the sanctum of first lessons. She was tall and whip-thin, her movements precise to the point of being mechanical, Her face bore the ritual scars of her rank, 13 parallel lines across her left cheek, each representing a decade of service to the temple. Her eyes were the color of winter sky, and they missed nothing. "Cadet 4471, she said without preamble. "You will refer to me as Master. Respond only when spoken to, and obey without question or hesitation. These are the first laws of the temple. Violation means death. Do you understand?" "Yes, Master." "Show me your hands." I extended both hands, palms up. She examined them with the intensity of a tech priest studying a holy relic, her fingers tracing lines and calluses with clinical precision. "Good bone structure," she murmured. "Steady muscle tone. No tremor." She moved to examine my eyes, her face centimeters from mine. I could smell the weapons oil that seemed permanently ingrained in her skin. Pupils respond normally. No signs of stim dependency or neural damage. She stepped back and activated a wall-mounted hololithic projector. The display showed a three-dimensional anatomical diagram of a human body, marked with dozens of colored points. "Your education begins now," Master Kestrel announced. "This diagram shows the 247 ways to kill a human with your bare hands. You will memorize each technique. Practice until muscle memory makes conscious thought unnecessary, and demonstrate mastery against live subjects. We begin with the 17 methods that cause instant death. The first technique was embarrassingly simple, a palm strike to the base of the skull that drove bone fragments into the brainstem. I practiced against training dummies until my hands bled, then against servitors programmed to resist and counterattack, then finally against condemned criminals in the temple's execution chambers. The first man I killed with my hands was a heretic from some outer system world whose name I never learned. He had been captured preaching the glory of the ruinous powers in the underhives of Armageddon. When I drove my palm into the base of his skull, feeling vertebrae separate and bone fragments pierce neural tissue, I experienced something new. Not pleasure exactly, but a deep sense of completion. This was what I had been made for. Master Kestrel watched without expression as the heretic's body convulsed and then went still. "Adequate," she said. "Tomorrow we progress to Technique 18, cardiac compression through the rib cage." Days blurred into weeks as my education continued. I learned that the human neck contained exactly 17 vulnerable points where applied pressure could cause unconsciousness, paralysis, or death. I memorized the precise angle needed to drive a combat knife between ribs to puncture the heart. I practiced garrots until I could throttle a man to death in 12 seconds or maintain strangulation for hours, keeping my victim conscious but helpless. The weapons training was equally intensive. The temple's armory contained examples of every killing tool ever devised, from primitive knives to exotic xenotech recovered from dead civilizations. I learned to kill with Katashan fang blades, Eldar monofilament wire, Jokero digital weapons, and devices so obscure they lacked names in Imperial Gothic. But always, we returned to the Exitus rifle. Master Kestrel introduced me to the weapon with the reverence others reserve for holy relics. The rifle was a masterwork of Imperial engineering, its every component crafted to tolerances measured in micrometers. The stock was carved from the bone of a Terran oak that had grown for 2,000 years before being harvested for this sacred purpose. The barrel was forged from metals whose names were known only to the highest ranks of the Mechanicus. "This weapon," she explained as I held it for the first time, "is attuned to your genetic signature. Only you can fire it. Only you can disassemble it. It will serve you faithfully until the moment of your death, and then it will die with you." The rifle felt alive in my hands. I could sense its machine spirit stirring as my fingers found the trigger guard. The weapon's targeting array interfaced directly with my nervous system through subcutaneous implants, feeding data directly into my visual cortex. Range, wind speed, humidity, target movement patterns. All of it flowed into my awareness as naturally as breathing. My first shot was at 100 meters, aimed at a target no larger than a throne gelt. The projectile, A mass-reactive shell designed to explode after penetration struck dead center. My second shot was at 500 meters, through a gap in a chain-link fence that should have deflected the round. Again, perfect accuracy. Interesting, Master Kestrel observed. Most candidates require weeks to achieve basic proficiency. You seem to possess an intuitive understanding of trajectory and wind compensation. She increased the difficulty. Targets at 1,000 meters, moving at various speeds. Targets partially concealed behind cover. Targets protected by energy fields that distorted visual identification. I hit them all. Every single shot. The temple began to take notice. Other masters would pause their own training sessions to observe mine. Senior assassins, their faces hidden behind ceremonial masks, would appear in gallery overlooking the ranges. I heard whispers in corridors, words like prodigy and chosen that followed me through the temple's stone passages. The psychological conditioning came next. They locked me in sensory deprivation chambers for days at a time, feeding my mind a constant stream of Imperial doctrine through neural feeds. They subjected me to hallucinogenic compounds that showed me visions of terror burning, while Xenos filth desecrated the Golden Throne. They forced me to watch picked captures of entire worlds falling to chaos, their populations transformed into writhing masses of corruption. A normal mind would have shattered. A normal person would have emerged from these sessions broken, traumatized, requiring years of therapy to function again. Instead, I felt only a cold clarity. I understood now why the Imperium needed assassins like me. The galaxy was full of threats that conventional forces could never eliminate. Hidden heretics, alien infiltrators, chaos cultists working from within. Someone had to remove them. Someone had to be willing to do what others could not. The final test of my initial training came after 6 months in the temple. Master Kestrel led me to a viewing chamber overlooking one of the temple's target ranges. Below, a woman in simple civilian clothing stood at the far end, unaware she was being observed. Felicia Von, Master Kestrel said, reading from a data slate. Age 37. Mother of 3 children. Works as a clerk in the Administratum's Bureau of Population Statistics. No criminal record. No known associations with heretical organizations. No history of anti-imperial sentiment. She handed me the Exitus rifle. "Kill her," she ordered. I loaded a standard round and took aim. The woman was reading something on her own data slate, occasionally looking up to check a chronometer on the wall. She had brown hair pulled back in a practical bun, laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of happiness despite the grim realities of Imperial life. "Why?" I asked. Master Kestrel's expression didn't change. "Because I have ordered it. Because the temple requires it. Because your service to the Emperor demands absolute obedience, regardless of your personal feelings." Through the rifle's scope, I could see Felicia Von more clearly. She was smiling slightly as she read, probably a message from one of her children, or a joke shared by a colleague. In a few seconds, she would be dead, and those children would grow up as orphans in the Imperium's vast machinery of service. I pulled the trigger. The mass-reactive shell took her in the center of the chest, exploding after penetration and destroying her heart, lungs, and major arteries in a spray of gore that painted the far wall red. She dropped instantly, her data slate clattering across the floor to rest in the expanding pool of her blood. Master Kestrel made a notation on her data slate. "Excellent accuracy," she said approvingly. "No hesitation, no signs of psychological distress. You are ready to progress to advanced training." As we left the viewing chamber, I caught a glimpse of servo skulls descending to clean up the mess. By tomorrow, there would be no sign that Felicia Von had ever existed. Her children would receive a standard notification of her death in service to the Emperor. Her position would be filled by another loyal servant. I felt nothing about her death, nothing at all. That should have worried me, I suppose. A normal person would have been horrified by what they had become, would have wept for the innocent life they had taken. But I was no longer normal, if I ever had been. The temple had taken whatever capacity for normal human emotion I possessed and burned it away, leaving only the perfect clarity of purpose. I was becoming exactly what the Imperium needed me to be: a weapon without conscience, a killer without remorse, an instrument of the Emperor's will that could function in situations where normal soldiers would hesitate or break. That night, as I lay in my cell reviewing the day's lessons, I realized I was smiling. Chapter 3. Truth. Glimpsed advanced training at the Vindicare Temple meant diving deeper into the architecture of death itself. Master Kestrel assigned me to Instructor Vane, a man whose face had been replaced by an augmetic mask that never showed expression. His voice came through a vox grill, stripped of all emotion and rendered in the flat monotone of machine speak. "You have learned to kill," Vane announced on my first day under his instruction. "Now you will learn to murder." The distinction, he explained, was crucial. Killing was what soldiers did: direct, honest, in service of obvious military objectives. Murder was more subtle, more complex. Murder required patience, planning, and the ability to destroy targets without anyone realizing a crime had been committed. The temple's advanced training chambers were marvels of Imperial engineering. Hololithic projectors could recreate any environment in perfect detail, from the marble halls of noble palaces to the toxic waste zones of hive city undercities. Advanced servitors, their personalities programmed from the neural patterns of real people, populated these simulations with targets and witnesses that behaved with unnerving authenticity. My first assignment was seemingly simple: eliminate a planetary governor during a state dinner without alerting his security detail or the 300 guests in attendance. The hololithic simulation was based on an actual event that had occurred on Vostroya 5 years earlier, complete with detailed behavioral profiles of every person present. I spent weeks studying the target. Governor Malthius was a careful man, paranoid about assassination attempts. He employed food tasters, wore concealed armor beneath his ceremonial robes, and never sat with his back to an open door. His security detail included former stormtroopers equipped with the finest gear the Imperium could provide. The solution came to me during my 7th complete walkthrough of the scenario. The governor had a weakness for Amasec brandy, particularly a vintage from his homeworld that he consumed every night before retiring. His personal servant, a man named Kelvin, who had worked for the governor's family for 30 years, was the only person allowed to prepare and serve this nightly libation. I killed Kelvin 3 days before the dinner, replacing him with a polymer flesh duplicate whose appearance I had surgically altered to match. The real servant's body was dissolved in acid and flushed through the Hab Block's waste reclamation systems, a technique I had learned during toxicology training. On the night of the dinner, I served Governor Malthius his brandy exactly as Kelvin had done for 3 decades. The glass contained a single drop of synthanol, a compound derived from catechin deathworld flora that would cause massive cardiac arrest exactly 47 minutes after ingestion. To observers, the governor would appear to die of natural causes brought on by the stress of his duties. The simulation ended with Governor Malthius collapsing during the evening's entertainment, his death attributed to heart failure. Security recordings showed nothing suspicious. Toxicology reports would find no trace of foreign substances. Kelvin's disappearance would be discovered days later, dismissed as the action of a servant who had finally grown tired of service and fled to seek his fortune elsewhere. "Adequate," Instructor Vane pronounced when the hologram faded. Time to completion: 3 weeks, 2 days, 17 hours. Collateral casualties, 1. Suspicion generated, 0. You may proceed to the next scenario. Each simulation grew more complex. I learned to kill with patience that measured itself in months or years. A corrupt administratum clerk who died from a rare disease contracted during a routine medical examination, except the disease was actually a tailored virus I had introduced through his air recycling system 6 months earlier. A heretic preacher whose shuttle suffered catastrophic engine failure over an ocean, the result of a micro-explosive I had planted in his personal transport during a routine maintenance inspection. The temple's archives contain detailed records of every successful assassination performed by Vindicare operatives throughout Imperial history. I studied them obsessively, learning from the successes and failures of my predecessors. I read about Assassin Vorthak, who eliminated an entire planetary government by introducing psychotropic compounds into their water supply that caused them to turn on each other in a bloody purge. I studied the work of Assassin Mariah, who spent 7 years infiltrating a chaos cult before eliminating its leadership in a single night. But the most important lessons came from studying failures. Assassin Vex, no relation to my former mentor, had been captured and executed after his target survived a poisoning attempt. The record showed that he had relied too heavily on exotic toxins when simple methods would have sufficed. Assassin Kaine had been killed by his own target's security forces because he had grown overconfident, taking unnecessary risks for the sake of elegant execution. Pride, Instructor Vane explained when we reviewed these cases, is the assassin's greatest enemy. Pride leads to unnecessary complexity. Pride demands recognition. Pride makes you want to sign your work like an artist. But we are not artists. We are tools in service of the Emperor's will. Tools do not seek recognition. Tools simply function. The psychological conditioning continued alongside the tactical training. They exposed me to increasingly disturbing stimuli, measuring my responses with clinical precision. I watched picked captures of Imperial citizens being flayed alive by Dark Eldar raiders, my heart rate remaining steady at 68 beats per minute. I observed servitor-recorded footage of entire worlds falling to tyrannid consumption, feeling nothing but mild interest at the efficiency of the alien feeding process. They tested my resolve with moral dilemmas designed to break lesser minds. Would I kill a child if ordered? Yes. Would I torture innocents for information, if necessary? Would I sacrifice loyal Imperial citizens to maintain my cover during deep infiltration missions? Without hesitation. Each correct answer was noted in my permanent record. Each moment of hesitation was analyzed and corrected through additional conditioning. The temple's tech priests began installing more advanced augmentations, neural implants that could override emotional responses, hormone regulators that prevented stress-induced performance degradation, memory enhancement devices that allowed perfect recall of tactical data. I was becoming more machine than man, and I embraced the transformation gladly. The most important lesson came during my 9th month of advanced training. Master Kestrel summoned me to her private chamber, a sparse room containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and a shrine to the God Emperor carved from a single block of Terran marble. "You have progressed rapidly," she observed, reviewing my training records. "Perhaps too rapidly. Some of my colleagues believe you lack the psychological stability required for independent operations. How can I prove otherwise, Master? By demonstrating that you understand the true nature of your service." She activated a hololithic display showing the face of a young woman with auburn hair and green eyes. "This is Anna Kestrel, my daughter, age 24, currently serving as a junior scribe in the Adeptus Administratum on Vostroya." I studied the image, noting facial features that could identify her in a crowd, estimating her height and weight, cataloguing details that might be relevant to targeting calculations. "Anna believes her mother works as a clerk in the Imperial Palace's archives," Master Kestrel continued. "She sends letters every month, telling me about her work, her friends, her hopes for advancement within the bureaucracy. She is loyal, productive, and has never given the Imperium any cause for concern." The Master reached into her desk and withdrew a data slate containing what appeared to be a standard assassination contract. The target's name was listed as Anna Kestrel. "The orders are fabricated," she explained calmly. "Created as a test of your dedication. If you accept this contract, my daughter will die, and I will lose the only person in the galaxy who remembers me as something other than an instrument of death. If you refuse, you will demonstrate that emotional attachments can still compromise your judgment." I took the data slate and read through the fabricated intelligence report. According to the fictional documents, Anna Kestrel had been identified as a potential security risk due to her position within the administratum and her family connections. The report recommended immediate termination to prevent possible information leaks. What would happen if I refused? I asked. You would be subjected to additional conditioning until your emotional responses could be properly suppressed. The process would take approximately 6 months and would leave you diminished, functional, but lacking the flexibility of thought that makes our best operatives so effective. I handed the data slate back to her. I accept the contract, I said. Master Kestrel's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or simple professional pride. You understand that this will require you to travel to Vostroya, infiltrate an Imperial facility, and eliminate a target who has committed no crime other than having the wrong parent. I understand. You realize that my daughter's death will serve no strategic purpose, accomplish no tactical objective, and further no aspect of Imperial policy. I understand. And you accept the contract anyway? Yes, Master, without hesitation. She deactivated the hololithic display and returned the data slate to her desk drawer. The contract is indeed fabricated, she said quietly. A test of your psychological conditioning. You have passed, though I confess the victory feels hollow. She looked at me with something that might have been sadness. Do you feel nothing for what you just agreed to do? No guilt, no shame, no sense of moral compromise? I considered her question carefully. She deserved honesty. No, Master. I feel curious about the technical challenges involved in infiltrating an administratum facility. Curious about the security measures I would need to overcome. Curious about whether the kill would be more effective at long range or close quarters. She nodded slowly. Yes, that is exactly what I expected you to say. She stood and walked to the shrine, running her fingers over the carved features of the God Emperor's face. You have become a perfect instrument of the Imperium's will. Congratulations. That night, as I lay in my cell reviewing the day's lessons, I tried to imagine what it would have felt like to refuse the contract, to choose human emotion over duty, sentiment over service. The concept was alien to me, like trying to imagine sight through closed eyes or sound through severed ears. I had become exactly what the temple intended, a killer without conscience, a weapon without remorse, an instrument of imperial will that could function in any situation regardless of moral complexity. The part of me that might once have hesitated, that might have wept for innocent lives, or questioned unjust orders, had been systematically identified and destroyed. I should have mourned its loss. Instead, I felt only the deep satisfaction of perfect function. 3 days later, Master Kestrel informed me that my advanced training was complete. I was to be granted full operational status as a Vindicare assassin, with all the privileges and responsibilities that position entailed. Your first assignment, she said, handing me a sealed data slate, is already waiting. Chapter 4. Creeping Dread. The world of Sectis Prime existed in a constant state of barely controlled chaos. A hive world of 18 billion souls. Its towering arcologies stretched from the planet's toxic surface to the edge of its polluted atmosphere. Smog hung over everything like a funeral shroud, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning from the perpetual electrical storms that raged in the upper atmosphere. I arrived via commercial transport, my identity documented as Jorik Voss, a mid-level tech adept seeking employment in one of the Hive's manufactory complexes. My cover was perfect, complete documentation, a verifiable work history, even personality quirks, and minor cybernetic implants that matched my supposed background. The Officio Assassinorum's forgers were masters of their craft. My target was High Fabricator Geneth Mork, the senior tech priest responsible for Sectis Prime's arms production. According to Imperial intelligence, Mork had been selling advanced weapon designs to separatist movements in the Segmentum Solar. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Increased rebel activity coinciding with the appearance of sophisticated Imperial weapons in enemy hands, unexplained gaps in production records, and encrypted communications between Mork's personal servitors and known heretical contacts. The contract was standard for this type of elimination. Make it look like an accident, minimize collateral damage, ensure no evidence pointed back to Imperial agencies. Simple parameters. but the execution would be anything but simple. High Fabricator Mork lived and worked in Spire Mechanicus, a massive structure that served as both manufacturing center and fortress monastery for the local tech priests. The spire was protected by void shields, automated defense systems, and a garrison of Skitarii warriors whose loyalty to the Mechanicus was absolute. Getting inside would require patience, planning, and perfect execution. I began by establishing myself in the surrounding hab blocks, taking employment as a maintenance technician in one of the smaller manufactories that supplied components to Spire Mechanicus. The work was tedious, 12-hour shifts spent calibrating plasma welders and replacing worn servo joints, but it provided valuable intelligence about the target facility. The tech priests followed rigid schedules dictated by their sacred routines. High Fabricator Mork began each day at exactly 05 and Wong with prayers to the Omnissiah, followed by inspection tours of the primary production lines. He took his midday meal at 12 Huos in his private chambers, accompanied only by his personal servo skull, an especially modified servitor designated as his food tester. Evening meditation occurred at 18 in the spire's highest chapel, where he would commune with the machine spirits of his most sacred equipment. The routine never varied. Not once in 6 weeks of observation did Mork deviate from his schedule by more than 3 minutes. Such predictability was both blessing and curse. It made planning easier, but it also meant his security protocols were designed around absolute schedule adherence. I spent my off hours mapping the spire's interior using maintenance access tunnels and service conduits. The ancient structure was honeycombed with passages originally designed for automated repair systems, most of them forgotten by the current inhabitants. I catalogued 73 different routes that could take me from the outer walls to the central chambers, noting security camera positions, patrol patterns, and sensor arrays. The solution came to me during my 7th week on Sectis Prime. High Fabricator Mork's personal servo skull was a masterwork of Mechanicus engineering, equipped with advanced cogitators and micro-manipulator arms, capable of performing delicate technical tasks. The skull accompanied Mork everywhere, serving as assistant, bodyguard, and companion. More importantly, the servo skull required daily maintenance to function properly. Its cognitive matrices needed to be purged of accumulated data corruption, its weapon systems required cleaning and calibration, and its anti-grav generators needed fresh promethium fuel. This maintenance was performed each night by Tech Adept Vrain, a junior member of the Spire's hierarchy who had served in that capacity for over a decade. I killed Tech Adept Vrain during a routine supply run to the lower hive, using a monofilament wire to sever his spinal cord at the base of his skull. The cut was so precise that from the front he appeared merely to be sleeping, an impression reinforced by the fact that I had positioned his body in his hab unit's reclining chair with a data slate in his hands. His disappearance would not be noticed for at least 6 hours, giving me enough time to complete my mission. Infiltrating the spire required all of my training in stealth and patience. I waited until the 02-hour shift change, when security was momentarily relaxed as guards were replaced. Using maintenance tunnels I had mapped weeks earlier, I made my way to the chamber where High Fabricator Mork's servo skull was kept for nightly maintenance. The security system was sophisticated but predictable. Motion sensors, thermal imaging, and cogitator-controlled locks that required specific binary codes. I bypassed them all using techniques learned in the Vindicare Temple's infiltration courses, moving like a shadow through corridors lined with the skulls of ancient tech priests. The servo skull floated in its maintenance cradle, inactive and vulnerable. Its optical sensors were dark, its weapon systems powered down. I had perhaps 20 minutes before automated systems would detect Tech Adept Vrain's absence and begin searching for him. Opening the skull's cranial cavity required delicate work with specialized tools. Inside, beneath layers of blessed circuitry and sacred cogitators, I found what I was looking for: the skull's olfactory sensors. These microscopic devices allowed the servo skull to detect chemical signatures, analyze atmospheric composition, and identify potential threats through scent analysis. I replaced one of the sensors with an identical component that I had modified during weeks of careful preparation. The replacement was indistinguishable from the original, except for a single crucial difference. When exposed to the specific pheromone signature of High Fabricator Mork's personal incense, a rare blend used only during his private meditations, the sensor would release a cloud of weaponized spores. The spores were a masterwork of biological engineering, designed to mimic the natural microorganisms found in the spire's ventilation systems. To any observer, Mork's death would appear to be the result of a rare but documented respiratory infection that occasionally afflicted tech priests who spent decades breathing recycled air filled with industrial pollutants. I sealed the skull's cranial cavity and activated its systems, watching as optical sensors flickered to life and weapon systems completed their startup diagnostics. Everything appeared normal. The modified sensor was undetectable, its presence masked by the skull's own electromagnetic field. Extracting from the spire required the same patience I had used to enter. I retraced my route through maintenance tunnels, avoiding guard patrols and security sweeps with mechanical precision. By 0430, I was back in my assigned HAB unit, ostensibly asleep after another routine shift at the manufactorum. High Fabricator Mork died 3 days later. The tech priest was conducting his evening meditation when the servo skull's modified sensor detected his personal incense. The spores were released in a barely visible cloud that Mork inhaled during his ritual breathing exercises. The biological weapon went to work immediately, attacking his respiratory system with engineered viruses that his cybernetic implants were not designed to counter. To observers, Mork simply collapsed during meditation, his augmetic respiratory systems failing as his organic lung tissue was consumed by what appeared to be a virulent strain of pneumonia. The servo skull, following its programming, immediately summoned medical assistance and began recording vitals. The data it transmitted showed classic symptoms of respiratory distress, followed by organ failure. Mork died within 6 minutes. His last words, a binary prayer to the Omnissiah, transmitted through his Vox grill. The investigation that followed was thorough but fruitless. Imperial Medici examined Mork's body and confirmed death by respiratory infection. Tech priests analyzed the spire's atmosphere and found elevated levels of industrial pollutants that could have compromised immune function. Security reviews showed no signs of unauthorized access or suspicious activity. Tech adept Vrain's disappearance was discovered the next day, his body found in his HAB unit where I had left it. The medical examination concluded that he had died of natural causes, a brain aneurysm that had caused sudden death while he was reading devotional texts. The fact that his death occurred on the same night as Mork's meditation session was noted but dismissed as coincidence. I remained on Sectis Prime for another 2 weeks, maintaining my cover identity while Imperial authorities completed their investigation. During this time, I observed the aftermath of the assassination with professional interest. The arms trafficking operation that Mork had been running collapsed within days of his death. Without his access to advanced weapon designs and manufacturing capabilities, the separatist movements he had been supplying were forced to rely on inferior equipment. 3 rebel cells were crushed by Imperial Guard forces within a month, their outdated weapons proving no match for properly equipped Loyalist troops. The Mechanicus appointed a replacement High Fabricator, a younger tech priest whose loyalty to the Imperium was beyond question. Production at Spire Mechanicus increased by 17% within 6 weeks as the new leadership eliminated the inefficiencies that Mork had used to cover his illegal activities. More interesting to me was the psychological impact of the assassination. The tech priests of Sectis Prime became noticeably more paranoid about security, implementing additional safety protocols and conducting frequent loyalty assessments. Several junior adepts requested transfers to other worlds, claiming they felt unsafe in the spire where their former leader had died so suddenly. Fear was spreading through their ranks like a virus, and I found myself fascinated by the process. A single death, carefully orchestrated and perfectly executed, had destabilized an entire religious hierarchy. The tech priests' faith in their own security measures had been shaken, their confidence in their ability to protect themselves undermined by the realization that even their most advanced defenses could not prevent a determined assassin from reaching them. This was the true power of the Vindicare Temple's methods. We did not simply eliminate targets, we created examples that influenced the behavior of entire populations. Every successful assassination sent a message to potential traitors and heretics. The Imperium's reach was infinite, its patience inexhaustible, and its justice inevitable. When I finally departed Sectis Prime aboard a commercial transport, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The mission had been executed flawlessly, the target eliminated without suspicion, and the broader strategic objectives achieved through minimal expenditure of resources. High Fabricator Mork's death would serve as a warning to other tech priests who might consider betraying their oaths to the Omnissiah and the Emperor. But as I reviewed my mission reports during the journey back to Terra, I noticed something that should have concerned me. The description of Mork's final moments. The way his augmetic systems had failed the sounds he had made, as the weaponized spores destroyed his respiratory system, the precise timing of his death. These details were recorded with clinical precision, but also with something else: enjoyment. I had taken pleasure in planning his death, satisfaction in watching it unfold, and pride in the elegance of the execution. These were not the emotions of a perfect weapon serving Imperial justice. They were the feelings of someone who had learned to find joy in the act of killing itself. The realization should have disturbed me. It should have prompted self-examination, perhaps even a request for psychological evaluation upon my return to the temple. Instead, I found myself looking forward to my next assignment, wondering what new challenges it would present and what innovative methods of execution it might require. I was changing, evolving beyond what the temple's conditioning had intended. Where they had sought to create an emotionless tool, I was developing into something more complex, a killer who had learned to love his work. The transport's cogitator chimed as we entered the Sol system, terror growing larger in the viewports with each passing hour. I would soon return to the Vindicare Temple to receive my next assignment, to add another name to my growing tally of successful eliminations. 4,847 targets across 43 worlds. Each death a masterpiece of planning and execution. Each kill a step further down a path that led away from humanity and towards something else entirely. I smiled as Terra's surface came into view, already anticipating the challenges ahead. Chapter 5. Nightmare Unleashed. The Calixis sector burned with the fires of rebellion, and I was sent to put out the flames one target at a time. My new assignment came with a promotion, senior assassin status and command of a 3-operative kill team, tasked with eliminating the leadership of the Hereticus Majoris uprising. It was the largest single operation I had ever been assigned, requiring coordination between multiple Imperial agencies and perfect timing across 17 different worlds. The heretics called themselves the True Covenant, claiming that the Emperor had been a false god who had led humanity astray. Their leader was a former Imperial preacher named Malthus Vaughn, who had somehow accessed forbidden archives in the depths of a Cardinal World's cathedral. Whatever he had read there had driven him to madness, or revelation, depending on one's perspective. Vaughn's followers numbered in the millions, spread across the subsector in cells that communicated through encrypted astropathic messages and coordinated their activities with the precision of a military organization. They had infiltrated Imperial institutions at every level, from local planetary defense forces to the Adeptus Administratum offices on sector capital worlds. My kill team consisted of myself and 2 other Vindicare operatives. Assassin Kira Vess, a specialist in long-term infiltration, whose record showed 37 successful eliminations over 15 years of service, and Assassin Marcus Thorne, a former Death Cult member who had been recruited after demonstrating exceptional skill in close-quarters elimination. We met for the first time in a briefing chamber deep beneath the Tricorn Palace on Scintilla, the sector capital. The room was warded against psychic intrusion and electromagnetic surveillance, its walls lined with null shields that made my skin crawl with their proximity to forbidden technology. Inquisitor Vex, a different Vex than my former mentor, this one a woman with eyes like chips of obsidian and scars covering half her face, presided over our briefing. She stood before a massive hololithic display showing the Calixis sector, red markers indicating known Covenant strongholds, while amber symbols marked suspected infiltration sites. The true Covenant represents an existential threat to Imperial authority in this sector, she began without preamble. Their heretical doctrine has spread beyond simple rebellion into something far more dangerous, a complete rejection of Imperial truth that threatens to undermine the foundation of civilized order. The display zoomed in on Malthus Vaughn's face, showing a man in his 60s with burning eyes and a mouth twisted into a perpetual sneer. His hair was white as parchment, his skin marked with ritual scarification that formed patterns I didn't recognize. Vaughn has gathered 12 senior disciples around him, Inquisitor Vex continued. Each one leads a major cell of the Covenant, coordinating activities across multiple worlds. Your mission is to eliminate all 13 targets within a 72-hour window, preventing them from adapting their security protocols or fleeing to prepared safe houses. The tactical challenge was immense. 13 targets spread across 17 worlds, each protected by fanatical followers and hidden within populations that had been thoroughly infiltrated by Covenant sympathizers. Conventional Imperial forces would take months to root them out, assuming they could identify the heretics at all. Assassin Vess, the Inquisitor addressed my teammate. You will eliminate targets 7 through 12. Your cover identities have been prepared, and transport to your assigned worlds has been arranged. Kira nodded, her pale features showing no emotion. She was tall and lean, with silver hair cropped short and eyes the color of winter ice. Her file indicated that she preferred poison, and had once eliminated an entire planetary government by introducing toxins into their ceremonial wine during a state dinner. Assassin Thorn, Vex continued, targets 1 through 6 are yours. Most are located in heavily fortified compounds that will require your particular expertise in close quarters work. Marcus was built like a siege tank, broad shoulders, massive hands, and arms covered in ritual scars from his death cult days. He favored blades over projectile weapons, claiming that he needed to see the light fade from his target's eyes to know they were truly dead. And you, Senior Assassin Kaine, the Inquisitor's obsidian gaze fixed on me, will eliminate Malthus Vaughn himself. The Heresiarch has surrounded himself with layers of security that make conventional assassination impossible. He never appears in public, never follows predictable routines, and changes location every few days using safe houses known only to his innermost circle. She activated additional holographic displays showing architectural plans, security layouts, and personnel files. However, our intelligence indicates that Vaughn will be attending a gathering of his senior disciples on the world of Tranche in exactly 14 days. This represents our best, perhaps only, opportunity to eliminate all 13 targets simultaneously. The plan was elegant in its complexity. Each assassin would position themselves on their assigned worlds, ready to strike the moment Vaughn was confirmed dead. The Heresiarch's elimination would be the signal for the others to begin their attacks, creating a cascade of death that would decapitate the entire Covenant leadership before they could react. But first, I had to get close to Malthus Vaughn. The world of Tranche was a dead rock circling a dying star, its surface covered in the ruins of ancient cities, whose builders had been forgotten by Imperial records. The Covenant had established a compound in one of these ruins, using the extensive underground tunnels as meeting places and storage facilities for their heretical materials. I arrived 3 weeks early, establishing myself as Brother Matthias, a wandering preacher whose faith had been shaken by recent encounters with Imperial brutality. My cover story was carefully constructed around real events, massacres and purges that had actually occurred, but had been justified as necessary actions against heretical populations. To Covenant recruiters, I would appear to be exactly what they sought: a disillusioned Imperial servant ready to embrace their twisted version of truth. The process of infiltrating the Covenant was disturbing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Their recruiters were skilled at identifying potential converts, using psychological techniques that preyed on doubt, guilt, and resentment against Imperial authority. They spoke of the Emperor as a tyrant who had enslaved humanity through false promises of protection and unity. More unsettling was how persuasive their arguments could be. When stripped of the obvious heretical elements, some of their criticisms of imperial governance were not entirely without merit. The Covenant pointed to real problems: the crushing bureaucracy that stifled human initiative, the brutal efficiency of imperial justice that crushed innocence along with the guilty, the way ordinary citizens were treated as expendable resources in the Imperium's endless wars. I found myself genuinely disturbed by how easily I could see their perspective, how their twisted logic could appear reasonable if one ignored the larger context of humanity, the struggle for survival. This was how corruption began, I realized, not with dramatic gestures of rebellion, but with small compromises, tiny acceptances of forbidden thoughts that grew like cancer until they consumed everything healthy. The initiation process took 2 weeks. I attended prayer meetings where Covenant disciples recited blasphemous litanies that made my skin crawl. I participated in confession sessions where potential converts were encouraged to share their doubts about imperial doctrine. I even underwent a ritual cleansing that involved symbolic rejection of my former loyalties, a ceremony that required me to spit on an image of the Golden Throne. Each act of simulated heresy felt like swallowing poison, but I endured it all with perfect composure. My psychological conditioning held firm, protecting my core loyalties while allowing me to project the appearance of genuine conversion. Finally, I was deemed worthy to meet Malthus Vaughn himself. The heresiarch received new converts in a chamber deep beneath the ruins, a space that had once served as a cathedral for the planet's original inhabitants. Ancient murals covered the walls, depicting scenes of worship directed towards something that definitely was not the God Emperor. Vaughn had placed his own throne at the chamber's center, positioning himself beneath a crumbling statue of whatever deity the long-dead builders had venerated. He was smaller than I had expected, barely 1.7 meters tall, with a slight build that seemed almost fragile, but his eyes held a fire that spoke of absolute certainty, the kind of burning faith that could inspire millions to die for a cause they barely understood. "Brother Matthias," he said as I approached, his voice carrying perfectly despite the chamber's acoustics. "I am told you seek truth beyond the lies of the false emperor." "I seek understanding, Holy One," I replied, using the title the Covenant applied to their leader. "The Imperial Creed teaches that suffering is sacred, that obedience is virtue, that questioning authority is sin. But I have seen too much to accept these teachings without doubt." Vaughn smiled, and in that expression I saw something that chilled me more than any threat or torture could have. He genuinely believed every word of his heretical doctrine. This was not a cynical opportunist seeking power through rebellion. This was a true believer who had convinced himself that betraying humanity was actually an act of salvation. "Doubt is the beginning of wisdom," he said, rising from his throne to pace around me. "The entity that calls itself the God Emperor has deceived humanity for 10 millennia, feeding on their worship, while offering nothing but endless war and suffering in return. We serve the true powers, ancient beings who offer genuine transcendence, real evolution beyond the limitations of mortal flesh." He gestured toward the murals on the walls, and I realized with growing horror that they depicted the ruinous powers of chaos. This wasn't simple rebellion against imperial authority. The Covenant had fallen to corruption of the most dangerous kind. "The time of revelation approaches," Vaughn continued, his eyes gleaming with fanatic fervor. "Soon, the barriers between realities will weaken, and our true masters will reclaim this galaxy from the corpse god's tyranny. Those who serve faithfully will be rewarded with immortality and power beyond imagining." I spent 3 more days in the compound, attending heretical sermons and participating in corrupted rituals that grew increasingly disturbing. The Covenant's true nature became clear. They were not simply political rebels, but active agents of chaos, seeking to tear down the barriers that protected humanity from the warp's influence. On the night before the gathering of senior disciples, I made my move. Malthus Vaughn maintained chambers in the deepest part of the compound, protected by his most fanatical followers and warded with protective symbols that I recognized as chaos iconography. Getting close to him required patience and perfect timing. The heresiarch followed a nightly routine of private meditation, spending 2 hours alone in his chambers studying texts that were undoubtedly forbidden by Imperial law. This gave me the opportunity I needed, but it also meant infiltrating a space that was actively corrupted by chaos influence. I entered his chambers through a ventilation shaft, my movements masked by the compound's background noise of generators and air recyclers. The room beyond was a monument to heresy, walls covered in blasphemous texts, shelves lined with artifacts that radiated psychic corruption, and at the center, a desk where Malthus Vaughn sat reading from a book bound in what looked disturbingly like human skin. He sensed my presence the moment I dropped into the room, looking up from his reading with calm acceptance rather than surprise. "Senior Assassin Kaine of the Vindicare Temple," he said softly. "I have been expecting you." I drew my sidearm, keeping it trained on him, while scanning for additional threats. "How long have you known?" "Since the moment you arrived on Tranche," Vaughn replied, setting aside his book with careful precision. "Did you really think the true powers would not warn me of Imperial agents in my midst? Your thoughts burn like a beacon in the warp, assassin. Your absolute loyalty to the corpse god marks you as clearly as if you wore Inquisition insignia." My finger tightened on the trigger, but something made me hesitate. This was wrong. Vaughn was supposed to be surprised, desperate, pleading for his life. Instead, he seemed almost pleased by my presence. "You're wondering why I haven't raised an alarm," he observed. "Why my guards haven't rushed to protect me? The answer is simple. I want to die." "Explain." Vaughn stood slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening. "My purpose was never to lead a successful rebellion. It was to draw out the Imperium's most skilled killers, to lure them into a trap that would serve my true master's designs. You have played your role perfectly, assassin, as have your colleagues on their assigned worlds." Ice formed in my stomach as the implications became clear. "The other targets are killing your teammates at this very moment," Vaughn finished. "Assassin Vess died 17 minutes ago on Malfi, poisoned by a contact toxin that had been applied to documents she believed contained intelligence on her target. Assassin Thorn lasted longer. His blade work was impressive, but eventually succumbed to last fire on Iocanthos after eliminating 6 Covenant disciples. I kept my weapon trained on him, but my mind was reeling. The entire operation had been a trap, designed to eliminate 3 of the Imperium's most skilled assassins in a single coordinated strike. "Why?" I demanded. Vaughn smiled, and this time there was nothing human in the expression. "Because the true powers have been watching you, Kaine Vorthak. They have seen what you have become, witnessed your transformation from reluctant killer to willing instrument of death. They want to offer you something the Imperium never could. The chance to embrace your true nature without shame or restraint." He reached for something on his desk, and I put 2 rounds through his chest without hesitation. The mass-reactive shells exploded inside his torso, shredding organs and painting the chamber walls with gore. But Malthus Vaughn continued talking. "Death is just another doorway," he gurgled through ruined lungs, blood frothing at his lips. "Beyond it lies eternal service to powers that understand what you truly are. Join us willingly and rule alongside the demon princes. Resist and be converted through less pleasant methods." I put 3 more rounds into his head, reducing it to paste and bone fragments. The heresiarch's body finally collapsed, twitching once before going still. But his words echoed in the chamber long after his voice had been silenced, and I realized that something fundamental had changed. The compound around me felt different, hostile in ways that had nothing to do with enemy guards or security systems. Reality itself seemed to press against me, as if the physical laws that governed the universe were being rewritten by unseen forces. Malthus Vaughn had been telling the truth about one thing. This had all been a trap. But not just for me and my teammates. It had been a trap for my soul. Chapter 6. tactical shift. The Ultramarine moved like liquid death, wrapped in ceramite and righteousness. His bolter spoke with the voice of the Emperor himself, each shell finding its target with the precision that only centuries of combat experience could provide. Where ordinary ammunition had failed against Chaos armor, his blessed rounds punched through corrupted ceramite to detonate inside the traitor's enhanced flesh. "Loyalist dog!" the lead Chaos Marine snarled, his cultured accent replaced by something far more primitive and vicious. "You think your corpse god's protection will save you here?" The Emperor's child raised his own bolter, a weapon that screamed with demonic voices as it fired. But the Ultramarine was already moving, rolling behind industrial machinery with superhuman grace. The possessed ammunition struck only empty air, detonating in bursts of pink fire that left reality twisted in their wake. "I am Sergeant Titus of the 4th Company," the Loyalist announced, his voice carrying absolute confidence despite being outnumbered 7-1. "In the name of Robert Guilliman and the God Emperor of mankind, I judge you traitors guilty of 10,000 years of heresy. The sentence is death." He emerged from cover with his chainsword already screaming, its monomolecular teeth blessed by the chapter's tech marines and anointed with oils sanctified in the presence of Primarch relics. The weapon met chaos steel in a shower of sparks that illuminated the factory floor like lightning. For the first time since our nightmare began, I saw one of the Emperor's children actually challenged in single combat. Sergeant Titus fought with the perfect form that was the birthright of all Adeptus Astartes. His movements a deadly dance that had been perfected over 10 millennia of warfare. But his opponent was equally skilled, corrupted perfection matching loyal discipline in a contest that seemed to defy physics. "Get to the extraction point," Voss whispered urgently, recognizing our opportunity. "While they're distracted." But I couldn't move. None of us could. After hours of helpless terror, we were witnessing something that belonged in the greatest legends of the Imperium, a loyal space marine dueling the enemies of mankind with the fury of an avenging angel. The Chaos Marine's blade carried sorcerous enhancements that allowed it to cut through reality itself, leaving tears in the air that bled impossible colors. But Titus's chainsword was protected by faith as much as technology, its machine spirit singing hymns of defiance against the powers of the warp. "You fight well for a slave," the traitor admitted, his voice carrying grudging respect. "It has been centuries since we faced a worthy opponent. This will be educational." 3 more Emperor's children moved to flank the Ultramarine, their coordination speaking to millennia of combat experience. But Titus had apparently anticipated this tactic. As they closed, he triggered something on his armor's chestplate. The teleportation Homer's signal pierced through whatever interference had been jamming our communications, broadcasting on frequencies that reached far beyond this ruined world. For exactly 1.7 seconds, a window opened in the electronic darkness that had isolated us from the wider Imperium. It was enough. Thunder filled the factory as 5 more Ultramarines materialized in flashes of azure light, their armor gleaming with purity seals and honor markings that spoke of countless victories. Each warrior was a masterwork of the Emperor's design, genetically enhanced and psycho-conditioned to be the ultimate expression of human military potential. 4th Squad, Ultramarines 3rd Company, their sergeant announced as he materialized with bolt pistol already firing. "By the grace of the Emperor and the wisdom of Guilliman, we bring death to the enemies of mankind." The battle that followed lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. I know the precise duration because I counted every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of the most ferocious combat I had ever witnessed. Space Marines fighting. Space Marines was like watching gods at war. Every movement was perfect, every shot precisely calculated, every parry executed with superhuman skill. The factory's interior became a storm of bolter fire, chainsword screams, and the distinctive crack of power weapons meeting chaos steel. But numbers began to tell. 7 corrupted transhuman warriors, enhanced by 10,000 years of demonic gifts, against 6 loyalists bound by duty and honor. The Emperor's children fought with the desperate fury of those who had already sold their souls and had nothing left to lose. The first Ultramarine fell when a sonic weapon caught him in the open, its impossible frequencies turning his enhanced physiology against itself. His death scream was cut short as his nervous system simply ceased to function, leaving his armor to crash empty to the factory floor. "Brother Cassius!" Sergeant Titus's voice carried genuine anguish, proof that even the Emperor's angels could feel loss. The lead Chaos Marine laughed as he reloaded his demonic weapon. "Did you think your corpse god's protection would preserve you? We learned to kill your kind when the galaxy was young." But his confidence proved premature. Even as he spoke, another Ultramarine flanked him from the east, moving through the industrial machinery with the patience of a born predator. The bolt pistol shot that took the traitor in the side was perfectly aimed, punching through a weak seal in his armor to detonate inside his enhanced ribcage. The Emperor's child staggered but didn't fall, his corruption-enhanced physiology already working to heal damage that would have killed any mortal man. Black blood seeped from the wound, steaming where it touched the factory floor. "Impressive," he admitted, turning to face his attacker with casual interest. But insufficient. The combat blade that erupted from his wrist was clearly of Xenos origin, its curved edge gleaming with poisons that could kill even space marines. When it met the Ultramarine's chains ward, both weapons shattered in a shower of sparks and impossible light. What followed was hand-to-hand combat between transhuman warriors, each blow capable of pulverizing normal humans. They moved too fast for unenhanced eyes to follow, their enhanced reflexes operating on timescales that made thought itself seem sluggish. Around them, their brothers continued the larger battle. The factory's interior became a maze of destruction as industrial machinery was torn apart by weapons that could level buildings. Every surface was scarred by bolter impacts, sonic distortions, and the strange wounds that chaos weapons left in reality itself. "Fall back to positions, Gamma," Sergeant Titus commanded his surviving warriors. "Enact Tactical Protocol 7-7. I didn't understand the reference, but apparently the other Ultramarines did. They began moving with even greater coordination, their actions suddenly synchronized in ways that suggested shared tactical doctrines refined over centuries of warfare. "Pitiful," one of the Emperor's children commented, as he reloaded his bolter with ammunition that writhed like living things. 10,000 years, and you still fight like the slaves you've always been, but something was changing in the battle's rhythm. Where the Chaos Marines had initially held the advantage through numbers and exotic weapons, the Loyalists were adapting with the methodical precision that had made the Ultramarines legendary. They moved as a unit now, each warrior covering his brothers, while exploiting enemy weaknesses with surgical precision. The turning point came when the youngest-looking Ultramarine managed to flank 2 Emperor's children who had been focused on suppressing his brother's fire. His heavy bolter spoke with the voice of the Emperor's wrath, its blessed shells tearing through corrupted armor to detonate inside enhanced flesh. Both Chaos Marines staggered under the assault, their armor cracking to reveal the twisted physiology beneath. But instead of falling, they began to change, their wounds sealed with unnatural speed while their forms grew larger, more monstrous, as demonic essence flowed into reality through their corrupted souls. "Demon princes," Voss whispered from our concealment behind an overturned conveyor belt. "They're ascending." The transformation was beautiful and horrible in equal measure. Where there had been corrupted space marines, now there were beings that existed partially in the warp, their forms shifting between physical matter and pure malevolent energy. They moved with impossible grace, their weapons now extensions of their daimonic will rather than mere technology. But Sergeant Titus seemed to have expected this development. He reached for something attached to his belt, a device that looked like a combination of grenade and sacred relic, its surface inscribed with words in High Gothic that hurt to read. "For the Emperor," he said simply, pulling the activation pin. The holy grenade's detonation was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Light filled the factory, not with mere photons, but with something that bypassed the eyes and went directly to the soul. Where it touched, demons screamed and retreated, their forms dissolving back into the warp that had spawned them. When my vision cleared, 3 of the Emperor's children lay dead or dying, their corrupted forms no longer able to sustain themselves in reality. But 4 still remained, and their rage at seeing their brothers banished was terrible to behold. Clever, the lead traitor admitted, wiping black blood from his mouth. But ultimately futile. We have eternity to perfect our hatred. You have only moments left to live. The final phase of the battle began with sonic weapons shrieking hymns to the Dark Prince, their frequencies calculated to resonate with Space Marine physiology in ways that caused maximum agony. But the Ultramarines endured, their faith and conditioning allowing them to function even under assault that would have driven normal humans insane. As the combat reached its crescendo, I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. We weren't just witnessing a battle. We were seeing a test, a demonstration of everything that separated the loyal from the damned. Every move, every shot, every sacrifice carried meaning that extended far beyond simple tactical necessity. The Imperium's enemies were ancient, powerful, and utterly without mercy. But they were also predictable, slaves to their own corruption, who had traded adaptability for power. The Loyalists were fewer in number and less individually powerful, but they fought with coordination and purpose that their enemies could no longer comprehend. When the last Chaos Marine fell, pierced through the heart by Sergeant Titus's power sword, the silence that followed felt like a religious experience. 7 of the galaxy's most feared enemies lay dead or banished, their threat ended by 6 warriors who had never forgotten their oaths of loyalty. "Threat neutralized," Sergeant Titus reported into his Vox unit, his voice carrying the satisfaction of duty properly performed. Requesting immediate extraction for Imperial Guard survivors. He turned to look at us then, his helmet's lenses focusing on our concealment with superhuman perception. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of the Emperor himself. "Well fought, guardsmen. The Imperium will remember your sacrifice." For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to believe that we might actually survive this nightmare. Chapter 7. Hard Lessons. The Thunderhawk gunship descended from Erebus Prime's blood-red sky like an angel of deliverance, its twin engines trailing contrails of blessed promethium. After 18 hours of hell, the sight of Imperial Navy aircraft approaching our position was almost enough to make me weep with relief. "Extraction confirmed," Sergeant Titus announced, his Vox unit crackling with static as orbital communications were re-established. Imperial Guard survivors ready for immediate evac. I looked around at what remained of 3rd Squad. Of the 8 men who had inserted onto this cursed world, only 4 survived. Myself, Sergeant Voss, Trooper Kaine, and Corporal Williams, who had somehow avoided the worst of the fighting by remaining unconscious behind a collapsed wall. 4 men out of 8, losses that would be recorded in the Departamento Munitorum's casualty reports as acceptable within operational parameters. The numbers didn't capture what we'd witnessed. They couldn't quantify the horror of watching Martinez consumed by something that had once been human, or the way Fleming had transformed into crystalline beauty before dying in agony. Statistics were inadequate to describe the moment when reality itself had bent around weapons that violated the basic laws of physics. "Move to the extraction point," Voss ordered, his voice hoarse from hours of combat and terror. "Stay alert until we're off-world." We picked our way through the factory's debris-strewn interior, stepping carefully around the remains of 7 Chaos Space Marines. Even in death, the traitors' armor showed the marks of their corruption, symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly, metal that bled when struck, technologies that had been fused with demonic essence over millennia of heretical practice. Sergeant Titus and his surviving battle brothers maintained overwatch as we moved, their enhanced senses scanning for threats that normal humans might miss. 3 Ultramarines had fallen in the engagement, their gene seed now lost forever to the Imperium. The survivors showed no obvious signs of grief, but I had learned enough about Space Marines to recognize the subtle changes in their posture that indicated profound loss. "Guardsmen," Titus addressed me directly as we reached the factory's main entrance. Your name and unit designation. Trooper 4471. Cadian 47th Shock Troops, sir, I replied, standing as straight as exhaustion would allow. You maintained discipline under extreme duress, he observed, his helmet's lenses focusing on my face with mechanical precision. Your conduct honors your regiment and the Imperium. Coming from an ultramarine, the compliment was worth more than any medal or commendation. These were warriors who had fought alongside Primarchs, who had defended the Imperium for 10,000 years against enemies that defied human comprehension. If Sergeant Titus considered our performance worthy of praise, then perhaps we hadn't completely failed in our duty. The Thunderhawk's landing created a whirlwind of dust and debris that stung exposed skin like 1,000 tiny needles. Its hull bore the scars of countless battles, lash burn marks, projectile impacts, and the distinctive scoring left by chaos weapons, but its machine spirit sang with perfect harmony, untainted by corruption or doubt. Bored immediately, the pilot's voice crackled through external speakers. We have a narrow window before enemy air defenses come online. As we climbed the assault ramp, I caught sight of the factory's interior one final time. 7 bodies in crimson armor lay where they had fallen, their forms already beginning to decay as the demonic essence that had sustained them leaked back into the warp. By tomorrow, they would be nothing but empty shells, monument to the Imperium's victory over forces that should have been invincible. The Thunderhawk's interior was a sanctuary of Imperial technology and sacred purpose. Every surface bore purity seals and litanies of protection, while the air recycling systems filled our lungs with air that tasted of machine oils and sacred incense rather than corruption and decay. Medical attention for the wounded, one of the Ultramarines ordered, as we secured ourselves in crash restraints. Full biological screening for chaos taint. The mention of taint made my stomach clench with new fear. Exposure to chaos corruption could manifest in countless ways, some immediate and obvious, others subtle and delayed. Every guardsman had heard stories of soldiers who had seemed perfectly normal for months after exposure, only to suddenly transform into something monstrous when the taint finally revealed itself. As the gunship lifted off from Erebus Prime's surface, I pressed my face against an armored viewport to watch the planet recede below us. From this height, the devastation was even more apparent. Entire cities reduced to ruins, vast areas of wilderness, twisted into shapes that hurt to perceive directly. This world was dying, slowly consumed by the malevolent influence of forces that existed beyond the material universe. Trooper 4471, Sergeant Titus approached my position, his massive form somehow moving silently despite the weight of his power armor. I have read your unit's mission reports. Your squad encountered 7 Chaos Space Marines and survived. That outcome suggests either exceptional skill or divine intervention. Both, sir, I replied honestly. We fought as hard as we could, but without your intervention, we would all be dead. The Emperor protects those who serve faithfully, he observed, but protection comes in many forms. Sometimes it manifests as superior firepower, sometimes as tactical opportunity. In your case, it appeared as knowledge. I looked at him questioningly, not understanding his meaning. You identified enemy capabilities before they could be fully deployed, he continued. Your warning about organized cultist behavior allowed my squad to arrive, prepared for transhuman opposition. Without that intelligence, we might have approached with insufficient force and faced defeat. The revelation that our desperate Vox transmission had somehow reached Imperial forces was almost overwhelming. We had thought ourselves abandoned, cut off from all support by enemy jamming. But somehow, our warning had gotten through at exactly the right moment to save not just our lives, but potentially prevent a far greater catastrophe. Sir, I ventured, were there other enemy forces on Erebus Prime, larger formations? Sergeant Titus was silent for a moment, his helmet's machine spirit communing with data streams that carried information beyond human comprehension. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute authority. Intelligence indicates that the 7 Emperor's children you encountered were an advanced reconnaissance force. Their mission was to evaluate Imperial defensive capabilities in preparation for a larger assault. By eliminating them, we have disrupted enemy operational planning and gained valuable intelligence about their intentions. The scope of what we had prevented was staggering. 7 Chaos Space Marines, each capable of slaughtering hundreds of normal humans, had been preparing the way for something even worse. Our mission, which had seemed like routine reconnaissance, had actually been a crucial engagement in a war that spanned the entire sector. "What happens to us now, sir?" Kaine asked from his position near the medical station, where an apothecary was examining his injuries for signs of corruption. "You will undergo standard post-exposure screening," Titus replied. "Physical examination, psychological evaluation, spiritual cleansing. If no taint is detected, you will be returned to your unit with commendations for exceptional service." The promise of survival, of returning to normal military duties, seemed almost too good to believe after everything we had witnessed. But the alternative, summary execution if chaos taint was detected, remained an unspoken possibility that hung over all of us like a sword. "Sir?" I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. "Why did they give us those 10 minutes? The Chaos Marines could have killed us immediately, but they chose to let us run." Sergeant Titus turned to face me fully, his helmet's lenses glowing softly in the gunship's dim interior. When he spoke, his voice carried the accumulated wisdom of centuries of warfare against the Imperium's enemies. "The Emperor's children are corrupted by Slanesh, the dark prince of excess and sensation. They no longer fight for tactical advantage or strategic necessity. They wage war for the pure sensation of combat, the emotional highs that come from inflicting and receiving pain. Allowing you to run enhanced their pleasure in the eventual hunt." The clinical explanation somehow made our ordeal even more horrifying. We hadn't been soldiers facing enemy combatants. We had been entertainment for beings that could no longer experience normal emotion without extremes of sensation. Our terror, our desperation, our hope of survival had all been flavors to be savored by palates jaded by 10,000 years of corruption. "That corruption is also their weakness," Titus continued. "They fight for sensation rather than victory. A truly tactical approach would have eliminated you immediately to prevent intelligence from reaching Imperial forces. Their need for stimulation allowed us to respond effectively. As we broke atmosphere and entered the cold vacuum of space, I could see Imperial Navy vessels waiting in orbital formation, cruisers and destroyers whose weapons could crack planets, their hulls gleaming with consecrated armor and blessed weaponry. The sight of so much Imperial power was overwhelming after hours of feeling helpless and abandoned. "The Imperium endures," Sergeant Titus observed, apparently noticing my expression. 10,000 years of warfare have taught us to recognize our enemies' weaknesses and exploit them ruthlessly. The powers of chaos are ancient and terrible, but they are not invincible. Every victory they achieve comes at a cost. Every excess makes them more predictable. The medical examination that followed was thorough beyond description. Every inch of exposed skin was scanned for the subtle marks that indicated chaos corruption. Blood samples were taken for analysis by genitor adepts, whose knowledge of human physiology bordered on the supernatural. Even our thoughts were probed by sanctioned psychers whose abilities allowed them to detect the slightest taint of heretical influence. After 6 hours of testing, we were declared clean. No corruption detected, no signs of demonic influence, no indication that our exposure to chaos forces had compromised our loyalty to the Imperium. We were survivors, not victims, and would be returned to active duty with our honor intact. But as I lay in the medical bay, listening to the ship's machine spirits singing their binary hymns, I knew that we had been changed by our experience. Not corrupted, but definitely altered. We had looked into the abyss of human evil and seen what the species could become when it abandoned its humanity. That knowledge would stay with us forever, a burden and a gift that would make us better soldiers and more faithful servants of the Emperor. The nightmares would come later. For now, we were alive, and that was enough. Chapter 8. Unit Forged. 3 weeks later, I stood in the assembly hall of Naval Station Proxima, watching as Sector Command pinned the medallion crimson to the dress uniform of what remained of 3rd Squad. The ceremony was conducted with all the pomp and circumstance that the Departamento Munitorum could muster, complete with recorded hymns and holographic displays showing the Imperium's glory. But the medals felt hollow in my hands. Bronze and ceramite couldn't capture what we'd witnessed in the ruins of Erebus Prime. No amount of ceremonial recognition could communicate the reality of facing humanity's oldest enemies and somehow surviving to tell the tale. For exceptional valor in the face of overwhelming odds, the Commissar read from a scroll that bore the seal of the Cadian High Command. The survivors of 3rd Squad, 47th Shock Troops, are hereby recognized for their service to the God Emperor and the Imperium of Man. Sergeant Voss stood at attention, his back ramrod straight, despite the injuries that still plagued him from our encounter with the Chaos Marines. Kaine's hands shook slightly as he received his medal, a tremor that the medical staff attributed to nerve damage, but which I knew came from remembering the sound of Martinez's final scream. Williams maintained perfect military bearing, though his eyes held a 1,000-yard stare that had become common among soldiers who'd faced the worst the galaxy could offer. After the ceremony, we were assigned to temporary quarters, while the Administratum decided our fate. Standard Imperial doctrine required extensive psychological evaluation for any personnel who had survived extended contact with Chaos forces. The process could take months, during which we would be observed, tested, and analyzed by specialists whose job was to determine if we remained fit for service. "Drink?" Voss suggested as we made our way through the station's corridors, our dress uniforms drawing salutes from junior personnel who recognized our decorations. The Enlisted Men's Club was a refuge of familiar sounds and smells, the clink of glasses, the low murmur of conversation, the underlying scent of cheap alcohol and recycled air. We found a corner table away from the main crowd, our movements synchronized in ways that spoke to shared experience beyond normal military training. "To the dead," Voss raised his glass, naming each fallen comrade with the precision that duty demanded. Stevens, Martinez, Fleming, Hendricks. They died as guardsmen, faithful to the end. We drank in silence, the alcohol burning away some of the cold that had settled in our bones during those terrible hours in the manufactorum. Around us, other soldiers told stories of their own campaigns, their voices carrying the casual bravado of men who had faced human enemies with comprehensible motivations. None of them had looked into the eyes of something that had once been human and seen nothing but malevolent intelligence savoring their fear like vintage wine. "They're assigning us to different units," Kaine said quietly, his voice barely audible over the ambient noise. "Received the orders this morning. Standard protocol for survivors of extreme encounters." The news wasn't surprising, but it still felt like another kind of death. We'd become something more than a military unit during those 18 hours of hell. We were witnesses to truths that most Imperial citizens would never comprehend, bound together by shared knowledge that set us apart from normal humanity. "Where?" I asked. "You and Williams to the Mordian Iron Guard, rotating garrison duty in the Segmentum Solar. Voss to training cadre on Cadia Prime. Me to communications specialist school on Valhalla." Kaine's laugh was bitter. "They are spreading us across half the galaxy to prevent contamination of unit morale through shared traumatic experience." The Departamento Munitorum's logic was sound, if coldly pragmatic. Soldiers who had witnessed the true horror of chaos warfare might spread fear and doubt among their comrades, undermining the morale that kept Imperial Guard regiments functional. Better to separate us, dilute our influence among fresh recruits who still believed that courage and training were sufficient to face any enemy. But they didn't understand what we'd gained along with our trauma. We'd learned that the Imperium's enemies, no matter how powerful, could be defeated through proper tactics and unwavering faith. We'd seen Space Marines fight and win against odds that should have been impossible. Most importantly, we'd discovered that duty and loyalty weren't just abstract concepts. They were the weapons that allowed ordinary humans to stand against the darkness. Contact, Williams spoke for the first time since the ceremony, his voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. Unknown personnel approaching our position. We turned as one, our movements synchronized by shared experience and heightened awareness. The figure approaching our table wore the midnight blue of the Ultramarines, his massive form somehow moving silently despite the weight of power armor. Other soldiers in the club unconsciously cleared a path, their instincts recognizing apex predator even without understanding the threat. Sergeant Titus, Voss stood immediately, his posture shifting to parade rest. Sir. At ease, guardsman, the Space Marine replied, his helmet's Vox grills modulating his voice into tones of absolute authority. I bring news from Chapter Command. He placed a data slate on our table, its surface displaying text in High Gothic script that spoke of assignments and transfers. But more importantly, it bore the seal of the Ultramarines' 4th Company, marking it as official communication from one of the Imperium's most respected military formations. Your service on Erebus Prime has been noted by senior commanders, Titus continued. The intelligence you provided allowed us to prevent a sector-wide chaos incursion that could have claimed billions of lives. Such service deserves recognition beyond mere medals. I read the data slate with growing amazement. Instead of assignment to regular guard units, we were being transferred to specialist formations that worked directly with Space Marine chapters. Reconnaissance units that operated behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence that conventional forces couldn't obtain. It was dangerous work, but it meant our experience wouldn't be wasted on garrison duty or training exercises. You've seen what the Imperium's enemies are truly capable of, Titus observed. That knowledge makes you valuable assets in the war against chaos, but it also makes you dangerous to normal troops who haven't shared your experience. This assignment allows you to serve where your unique insights will be most effective. The irony wasn't lost on me. By surviving an encounter that should have killed us, we'd become too valuable to waste and too dangerous to integrate with normal forces. We were specialists now, experts in a field of warfare that most Imperial commanders preferred to ignore. Sir, I ventured, what happened to the other Chaos forces in the sector? Were there follow-up operations? The threat has been contained, Titus replied, his tone suggesting that the subject wasn't open for detailed discussion. Your warning allowed us to deploy appropriate countermeasures before the enemy could establish a permanent foothold. Several worlds that might have fallen to chaos corruption remain loyal to the Imperium. The casual mention of several worlds drove home the scope of what we'd helped prevent. Planets with populations in the billions, their fate decided by our desperate Vox transmission from a ruined factory. The weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. When do we deploy? Voss asked, his voice carrying acceptance of duty that had defined his entire military career. Transport departs in 72 hours, Titus replied. Your new units will provide additional training in specialized reconnaissance techniques, but your primary qualification is experience. You've faced the enemy and survived. That makes you more valuable than a dozen recruits with perfect test scores. As the Space Marine prepared to leave, he turned back to address us one final time. Remember what you've learned, Guardsmen. The Emperor's enemies are ancient and terrible, but they are not invincible. Every victory they achieve comes at a cost. Every excess makes them more predictable. Your duty is to exploit those weaknesses and ensure that others can do the same. After he left, we sat in contemplative silence, absorbing the implications of our new assignments. We would never again be normal guardsmen, content with simple objectives and comprehensible enemies. We were marked men, veterans of encounters that existed at the furthest margins of Imperial military doctrine. Think we'll see each other again? Williams asked, his voice carrying an emotion that duty had taught us to suppress. Count on it, Voss replied firmly. Wars like this don't end quickly, and specialists with our experience are rare. The galaxy's big, but the fight against chaos makes it smaller than you'd think. Over the next 2 days, we completed our final preparations for transfer. Medical examinations confirmed that we remained free of chaos taint, while psychological evaluations declared us fit for continued service despite elevated stress indicators consistent with extended combat exposure. The night before deployment, I found myself standing at one of the station's observation windows, looking out at the stars that held so many worlds locked in perpetual warfare. Somewhere among those lights, chaos cultists were spreading their corruption, while space marines fought to contain threats that could destroy entire civilizations. 3 weeks ago, I had been Trooper 4471 of the Cadian 47th Shock Troops, a competent soldier with 12 years of faithful service. Now I was something else entirely. A specialist, a witness, a survivor of encounters that most humans couldn't imagine. The change wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. The Imperium needed soldiers who understood what they were truly fighting against. Not just the human enemies who could be defeated through superior firepower and tactics, but the cosmic horrors that threatened the very existence of humanity itself. We had looked into that abyss and returned with knowledge that could save lives and worlds. Tomorrow, we would begin new careers in units whose existence was barely acknowledged in official records. We would hunt enemies that violated the basic laws of physics and fight battles that would never appear in history books. But we would serve faithfully, as we always had, because duty demanded it, and the Emperor protected those who protected others. The nightmares would continue, but so would we. That was enough. Chapter 9. Victory earned. 6 months later, I crouched in the ruins of another dead city on another damned world, watching through my scope as cultist patrols moved through streets that had once housed 3 million loyal Imperial citizens. The planet was called Mordax 7, and it had been under chaos occupation for 4 months, before intelligence decided that someone needed to take a closer look at enemy activities, that someone was Shadow Squad, a reconnaissance unit that didn't officially exist, and conducted operations that were never recorded in any military archive. 5 specialists with experience fighting the Imperium's worst enemies, each one a survivor of encounters that should have been fatal. Contact bearing 270, distance 400 meters, whispered Corporal Chen through our microbead network. He was our sniper, a former Talon desert raider who'd survived a Demon Prince manifestation on his homeworld. The experience had left him with an almost supernatural ability to remain motionless for hours while tracking targets through impossible terrain. Through my magnoculars, I could see what had caught his attention. A procession of robed figures moving toward the city's central spire with the measured pace of religious ceremony. At their head walked something that might have been human once, but was now clearly touched by powers beyond mortal comprehension. Confirmed sighting of HVT Alpha, I reported to our handler via encrypted Vox channel. Cult Magus, displaying visible signs of warp mutation, proceeding with intelligence gathering as per mission parameters. The response came back immediately. Acknowledged, Shadow 1. Maintain observation. Do not engage without direct authorization. Our mission was reconnaissance only. Gather intelligence on enemy strength and disposition. Identify key targets for future operations, then extract without compromising our position. It was the kind of work that required patience, discipline, and the ability to watch horrors unfold without intervening. But watching was enough. The information we gathered would guide strikes that could save entire worlds. Movement on the eastern approach, reported Sergeant Kowalski, our team leader and a veteran of the Armageddon Steel Legion. Multiple contacts, mixed infantry, and light vehicles. I shifted my observation to the indicated sector and felt my blood chill. The contacts weren't random cultist patrols. They were organized formations moving with military precision toward defensive positions around the central spire. Someone was preparing for a fight, which meant our presence might have been compromised. Possible compromise, I transmitted to our handler. Enemy forces assuming defensive postures consistent with anticipated Imperial assault. Recommend immediate extraction. But before the response could arrive, the sky above Mordax 7th erupted into violence. Drop pods screamed down from orbit like falling stars. their heat shields glowing white-hot as they penetrated the planet's atmosphere. Each one carried a squad of space marines from the Imperial Fists chapter, their yellow armor gleaming like golden thunder as they deployed with perfect precision across the city as primary tactical objectives. Operation Cleansing Fire is now active. Our handler's voice crackled through increasing interference. Shadow Squad, maintain position and provide real-time intelligence on enemy response to Imperial assault. From our concealment in a collapsed administratum building, we had a perfect view of what followed. The Imperial Fists moved with the methodical precision that had made them legendary, clearing buildings with coordinated fire teams, while Devastator squads provided overwatch from elevated positions. Their weapons spoke with the voice of the Emperor's wrath, bolter rounds and plasma blasts, turning cultist positions into cratered ruins. But the enemy wasn't helpless. As the first wave of loyalist forces secured their initial objectives, something far worse began to emerge from the city's depths. Demon manifestation confirmed, Chen reported, his voice tight with controlled fear. Central spire, upper levels, entity classification unknown, but it's big. Through my scope, I could see reality itself bending around the spire's peak as something that existed partially in the warp forced itself into physical existence. The demon was beautiful and terrible in equal measure, its form shifting between states of matter that human perception couldn't properly process. When it spoke, its voice carried across the entire city with supernatural clarity. Mortals, you dare bring your pathetic crusade to our sacred ground. We shall teach you the true meaning of suffering. The Imperial Fist's response was immediate and devastating. Lascannons spoke from a dozen positions simultaneously, their beams converging on the daemon with precision that spoke to centuries of tactical doctrine. But where the energy weapons struck, the creature's form simply absorbed the impacts without visible effect. Conventional weapons ineffective, I reported, demon displaying immunity to directed energy assault. That's when I saw them. 3 figures in midnight blue power armor moving through the city's ruins with the inexorable patience of apex predators. Ultramarines, their armor decorated with purity seals and honor markings that spoke of countless victories against the enemies of mankind. Librarian deployment confirmed, Kowalski observed. Looks like someone came prepared for demonic opposition. The lead ultramarine carried a force weapon that crackled with psychic energy, its blade wreathed in power that existed partially in the warp. When he raised it toward the demon, reality itself seemed to respond to his will, bending around him in ways that made my enhanced senses scream warnings about impossible geometries. The psychic duel that followed was visible to unaugmented humans as flashes of light and distortions in the air that made focusing difficult. But through my scope's enhanced optics, I could see the true battle. 2 forms of consciousness, wrestling for dominance over the fundamental forces of existence. Demons manifesting secondary entities, Chen reported, as smaller horrors began materializing around the central spire. Count 17 lesser demons, classification mixed. Some of them look familiar. I knew what he meant. After 6 months of operations against chaos forces, we'd learned to recognize the different types of demonic entities that served the dark gods. These were Slaneshi manifestations, creatures of excess and sensation that fed on human emotion and suffering. The Imperial Fists adapted their tactics immediately, switching to blessed ammunition and consecrated weapons that could wound entities that existed partially outside reality. But for every demon they banished, 2 more seemed to take its place, the central entity's power growing stronger as the battle's intensity increased. Shadow 1, this is command. Our handler's voice cut through the psychic interference. Priority intelligence update required. Demon entity shows signs of permanent manifestation. Assess threat level for sector-wide deployment. The pause before response told me everything I needed to know. Sector Command was weighing the cost of destroying an entire world against the risk of allowing chaos to gain a permanent foothold in Imperial space. Negative on Exterminatus authorization, came the eventual reply. Imperial Fists have deployed specialized assets. continue observation, and report outcome. The specialized assets turned out to be a Grey Knights strike team that materialized via teleportation directly onto the spire's upper levels. Even through enhanced optics, looking at them directly was difficult. Their armor seemed to repel observation through some combination of psychic wards and blessed technology. When they engaged the demon in close combat, the battle became something that existed beyond normal physical laws. Reality twisted and buckled around the combat zone as warriors specifically engineered to fight demonic entities met something that had never been fully human to begin with. The fight lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. When it ended, the demon was gone, banished back to the warp with wounds that would take millennia to heal. The lesser entities followed, their connection to reality severed by their master's defeat. Demonic threat neutralized, I reported to command. Grey Knights successful. Warp breach sealed. Planet secured for Imperial reclamation. But as the Imperial forces began securing the city, I realized something that the official reports would never acknowledge. We were winning, not just this battle, but the larger war against chaos itself. Every engagement taught us more about our enemy's weaknesses. Every victory made the next one more achievable. The Emperor's children we'd faced on Erebus Prime had been ancient and terrible, but they'd also been predictable, slaves to their own corruption. The demon on Mordax 7th had possessed immense power, but that power had made it vulnerable to specialists who understood its nature. Humanity's enemies were learning, but so were we, and we were learning faster. We were. Extraction in 30 minutes, Kowalski announced, as Imperial forces completed their sweep of the city. Good work, people. Intelligence gathered here will guide operations across 17 systems. As we prepared to leave Mordax 7, I looked back at the central spire one final time. Somewhere in the warp, forces of unimaginable malevolence were plotting humanity's destruction. But here in reality, soldiers like us stood watch, gathering the knowledge needed to defeat them. The nightmares would continue, but so would we. And that was enough. Chapter 10, Warriors Made. 2 years after Erebus Prime, I stood in the command bunker of Firebase Omega 7, watching hololithic displays that showed the deployment of Imperial forces across 3-star systems. The tactical information streaming across the screens represented months of intelligence gathering by units like Shadow Squad, translated into operational plans that could save or damn entire worlds. Chaos forces confirmed in the Zerian cluster, reported Colonel Valdez, the operation's overall commander. Intelligence suggests a Black Legion warband operating in coordination with Alpha Legion infiltrators. Estimated strength, 2,000 traitorous Astartes plus supporting elements. The numbers should have been terrifying. 2,000 Chaos Space Marines represented a threat that could conquer dozens of worlds if left unchecked. But instead of fear, I felt the cold satisfaction of a predator sizing up its prey. We knew their weaknesses now. Every engagement, every survivor's report, every intelligence briefing had added to our understanding of how the traitor legions operated. The Black Legion fought with the brutal efficiency of Horus's chosen, but they were arrogant and predictable. The Alpha Legion relied on deception and infiltration, but their need for elaborate schemes made them vulnerable to direct assault once their positions were revealed. Deployment orders confirmed, Valdez continued. Operation Purging Fire will commence in 72 hours. 5 Space Marine chapters, 12 Imperial Guard regiments, and specialized assets from the Ordo Malleus. Total force strength, approximately 50,000 Imperial personnel. I studied the tactical displays with the eye of a specialist who'd learned to recognize the patterns that marked successful anti-chaos operations. The deployment showed the methodical precision that had made the Imperium capable of fighting a 10,000-year war against enemies that violated the natural order. Fast attack formations to prevent enemy withdrawal. Heavy assault units to break fortified positions. Specialized teams equipped with blessed weapons and psychic wards to deal with demonic manifestations. And reconnaissance assets like Shadow Squad to provide real-time intelligence on enemy capabilities and dispositions. Shadow 1, Colonel Valdez addressed me directly. Your team will deploy to Zarian Prime advance of the main assault. Standard reconnaissance protocols, but with authorization for direct action if high-value targets present themselves. The mission parameters were familiar. Infiltrate enemy-held territory, gather intelligence on Chaos Force disposition, identify key targets for elimination. But the authorization for direct action was new, reflecting the confidence that senior commanders now had in our abilities. Over 2 years of operations, Shadow Squad had evolved from simple reconnaissance specialists into something more dangerous. We were hunters now, predators who stalked the Imperium's worst enemies through the darkness between stars. Our success rate was 93%, with mission completions that had prevented dozens of Chaos incursions before they could gain momentum. "Sir," I replied, "Shadow Squad stands ready to serve." As the briefing continued, I reflected on the changes that 2 years of specialized operations had wrought. The trembling guardsman who'd cowered in a ruined chapel while Chaos Marines stalked him like prey was gone, replaced by someone harder and more focused. I'd learned to think like the enemy, to anticipate their tactics and exploit their weaknesses with clinical precision. The nightmares still came, but they no longer paralyzed me with fear. Instead, they served as reminders of what would happen if we failed in our duty. Every face that haunted my sleep was motivation to ensure that other soldiers wouldn't have to face the same horrors unprepared. After the briefing, I found my team conducting final preparations in the armory. 2 years had forged us into something more than a military unit. We were a precision instrument designed specifically to hunt humanity's oldest enemies. Chen was calibrating his long-last rifle, the weapon's machine spirit singing hymns of accuracy that could place rounds through Chaos Marine eye lenses at distances approaching a full kilometer. Kowalski checked the blessed ammunition in his bolt pistol, each shell inscribed with litanies that could wound entities existing partially in the warp. Our newest member, Corporal Martinez, no relation to the Martinez who died on Erebus Prime, was reviewing tactical data on Alpha Legion infiltration patterns. He'd joined us after surviving a demon incursion on his homeworld, bringing experience with enemies who could wear human faces while serving powers beyond mortal comprehension. "Equipment check complete," Kowalski reported. "All personnel ready for immediate deployment." The transport that carried us to Zarian Prime was a modified assault boat whose hull bore the scars of dozens of covert insertion missions. Its machine spirit had been blessed by tech adepts who understood the need for absolute reliability when operating behind enemy lines, and its pilot was a woman whose face showed the ritual scarifications that marked veterans of the most dangerous operations. As we approached the planet's surface under cover of electromagnetic interference generated by the approaching Imperial fleet, I studied the intelligence reports one final time. Zarian Prime had been a prosperous agri-world before the Chaos incursion, its population of 12 million citizens living in harmony with the Imperium's laws. Now it was a charnel house where human suffering had been refined into a form of worship that fed powers existing beyond reality. 30 seconds to insertion, the pilot announced. LZ appears clear, but that could change quickly. We made planetfall in a forest of twisted trees whose bark wept substances that hurt to identify. The local ecosystem had been corrupted by months of chaos occupation, transformed from natural beauty into something that violated basic biological principles. Even the air tasted wrong, thick with pollutants that seemed designed to induce despair in anyone forced to breathe them. Auspex readings indicate massive psychic disturbance approximately 10 kilometers north, Chen reported. Energy signatures consistent with large-scale ritual activity. Through my enhanced optics, I could see the glow on the horizon that marked our destination. Zarian Prime's capital city, now transformed into a hellscape, where 10,000 years of human civilization were being systematically destroyed by forces that existed before mankind learned to make fire. We moved through the corrupted landscape with the patience of born predators, our enhanced senses alert for threats that conventional training couldn't prepare soldiers to face. Every shadow could hide a demon, Every sound might herald the approach of traitor Astartes. Every moment of carelessness could result in death or worse. But we were no longer the terrified guardsmen who'd fled from Chaos Marines in a ruined factory. We were specialists, experts in a form of warfare that most Imperial commanders preferred to ignore. We'd learned to think like our enemies, to anticipate their tactics, and to exploit the weaknesses that corruption inevitably created. The first contact came at 0347 hours local time, when our auspex detected movement in a grove of trees whose branches formed patterns that hurt to perceive directly. Through thermal imaging, I could see 7 figures in power armor moving with the fluid grace that marked transhuman warriors. But instead of fear, I felt the cold satisfaction of recognition. These were world eaters, servants of the blood god, whose corruption had reduced them to living weapons incapable of tactical thought beyond direct assault. Dangerous in close combat, but predictable in ways that could be exploited by soldiers who understood their limitations. World Eaters confirmed, I whispered into our tactical network. 7 contacts, standard patrol formation, deploying countermeasures. The blessed fragmentation grenades we developed specifically for anti-Astartes operations detonated in sequence. Their consecrated shrapnel designed to penetrate chaos power armor at precisely calculated angles. Where normal explosives would have been shrugged off by transhuman physiology, these weapons carried the Emperor's wrath made manifest in molecular form. 2 World Eaters fell immediately, their corruption-enhanced nervous systems unable to cope with injuries inflicted by weapons blessed in the presence of Primarch relics. The survivors charged our positions with the mindless fury that had made them legendary, but they were charging into carefully prepared kill zones that channeled their assault into predetermined areas. Chen's Longlas spoke with mechanical precision, each shot placed with supernatural accuracy through weak points in chaos armor. Kowalski's bolt pistol chattered on semi-automatic, its blessed shells detonating inside transhuman flesh with effects that would have been impossible using conventional ammunition. The engagement lasted exactly 97 seconds. When it ended, 7 of the galaxy's most feared warriors lay dead or dying, their threat eliminated by 4 soldiers who'd learned to think faster and fight smarter than enemies who'd been killing for 10,000 years. Contacts neutralized, I reported to command, proceeding to primary objective. As we continued toward the capital city, I realized that something fundamental had changed in humanity's war against chaos. We were no longer merely surviving encounters with the Imperium's enemies. We were hunting them with the same methodical precision they'd once used against us. The Chaos Marines we'd faced on Zerion Prime had been ancient and terrible, but they'd also been predictable, slaves to corruption that made them vulnerable to tactics they couldn't comprehend. Every victory taught us more about their weaknesses. Every engagement made the next one more achievable. When the main Imperial assault began 6 hours later, our intelligence guided orbital bombardments that eliminated key enemy positions before they could respond effectively. The Black Legion warband found itself fighting a battle that had been decided before the first shots were fired, their ancient tactical doctrines unable to adapt to enemies who understood their nature. The campaign lasted 3 days. When it ended, Zerion Prime was free of chaos taint, its population of survivors ready to begin the long process of rebuilding their world under Imperial law. But more importantly, we'd proven something that senior commanders were finally beginning to understand. Humanity's enemies were not invincible. They were ancient and terrible, but they were also predictable. Slaves to their own corruption who could be defeated through proper tactics and unwavering faith. Standing in the ruins of what had been a chaos shrine, watching Imperial forces burn the last remnants of heretical influence, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. 4 years ago, I'd been a simple guardsman who understood duty but not purpose. Now I was something else entirely, a weapon forged specifically to fight humanity's oldest enemies. The nightmares would continue, but so would we, and in the end, that would be enough. The Emperor protects, but he helps those who learn to protect themselves. Final word. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But within that endless conflict, there are moments of triumph that shine like stars against the void. Every guardsman who stands his ground against impossible odds, every space marine who falls defending humanity's future, every specialist who learns to hunt the hunters, they all contribute to a victory that may take 10,000 years to achieve, but which grows closer with every battle won. The Chaos Marines we faced on Erebus Prime represented everything that humanity could become if it abandoned its principles and surrendered to corruption. But they also proved something equally important. Even the worst enemies can be defeated by soldiers who refuse to surrender their humanity, no matter the cost. This is what it means to serve in the Emperor's armies. Not glory, not recognition, but the simple knowledge that duty faithfully performed can hold back the darkness for another day. The galaxy burns, but humanity endures. And that is enough. The story of Trooper 4471 represents more than one man's journey from terror to competence. It illuminates a fundamental truth about humanity's struggle in the 41st millennium. When an ordinary Imperial Guardsman encounters a Chaos Space Marine, the expected outcome is swift death. These traitors are transhuman warriors with 10,000 years of combat experience, equipped with technology that borders on the supernatural and enhanced by gifts from powers that predate human civilization. Yet survival is possible, not through heroics or impossible courage, but through the unglamorous virtues that define the Imperial Guard: discipline, tactical thinking, and the willingness to adapt under pressure. Trooper 4471's squad survived their initial encounter not because they were exceptional soldiers, but because they recognized their limitations and fought accordingly. They gathered intelligence, maintained communications, and made tactical decisions based on available information rather than wishful thinking. The intervention of Sergeant Titus and his Ultramarines demonstrates another crucial element. The Imperium's strength lies not in individual heroism, but in coordinated response. The Chaos Marines were defeated not by superior firepower alone, but by the systematic application of doctrine refined over millennia of warfare. Every engagement teaches new lessons. Every survivor's report adds to humanity's understanding of its enemies. Perhaps most importantly, the story shows how trauma can be transformed into strength. The survivors of Third Squad could have been broken by their experience, rendered unfit for further service by exposure to horrors beyond normal comprehension. Instead, they became specialists, hunters who understood their prey better than conventional soldiers ever could. Their knowledge became a weapon more valuable than any piece of equipment. This transformation reflects a larger truth about the Imperium's war against chaos. Humanity's enemies are ancient and terrible, but they are also predictable. Their corruption makes them slaves to their own natures, unable to adapt or evolve in ways that matter. Meanwhile, human soldiers learn, grow, and pass their knowledge to others. Each generation becomes slightly more effective at recognizing and countering the threats that face them. The galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 is often described as grimdark, a setting where hope is scarce and victory is measured in degrees of loss rather than triumph. But stories like this reveal another dimension: the quiet heroism of ordinary people who refuse to surrender their humanity regardless of what they face. They may carry scars, both physical and psychological, but they continue to serve faithfully because duty demands it and because someone must stand watch against the darkness. In the end, when a guardsman meets a Chaos Marine, the outcome isn't predetermined by power levels or equipment specifications. It's determined by preparation, tactics, faith, and the simple refusal to give up. These qualities won't guarantee survival, but they make it possible. And in the grim darkness of the far future, possibility is often enough to kindle hope. The Emperor protects, but he protects most those who protect themselves and others through skill, courage, and unwavering dedication to duty.